That's a more complicated question. And first, thanks to you for doing this interview and to Glenn for being backstage. That's a real contribution. Um, uh, I, I don't think I heard about NTL right away, but when I was involved with the Gestalt Institute, I got a couple diplomas from them back in the 70s. NTL was another place that existed. Um, and so finally, I talked to Ed Nevis and Sonia Nevis. She was my mentor about whether I should join NTL. Was this something I should do? And they said yes. And so I checked it out. And at that point, the membership was closed to further members for half a dozen years, I think. So by the time I got officially uh, into NTL, it was late 1982. I'm not sure whether I officially was okay to 90 in 83 or in 82. But in 1978, autumn sometime, September, I think, I did a uh, trial run as a intern or an apprentice or whatever we called it back then, uh, uh, with, geez, can I remember names? No. But three senior people. In fact, I still remember my feedback. One bit of feedback from the 20, 25 people in the lab was something like a uh, a rough, or ragged wheel in a smoothly oiled machine. So the other three knew what they were doing, and I didn't. Um, but that lab was crucial in several ways. One of them is on my list of 7 things to say today. One of them was that we went out to dinner on the Thursday night uh, on a riverboat. This was in Cincinnati, so we were on a riverboat restaurant. And this is back in 78. This is back when we had teachers and social workers and normal people, not just corporate folks.
Right.
And um, I had learned from my dad, who was a lawyer, that the way to do socialism in one way was to have several wealthy clients who could pay you good money, and then you could work for free for other people. And I was thinking of that when
What
this
you still do,
woman,
but you still use the philosophy, right? I know.
yeah, and we were at dinner in this riverboat restaurant, and a woman across from me was looking at the menu, and she sort of uh, looked up and looked around, and then she said to the guy next to her, I can't afford this. And he turned to her and said, no problem, just use your expense account. Her response was, what's an expense account? Not, I don't have one. What is one? And the guy, I wish I could remember his name, he picked up his fork, tapped on his glass, and said, people, how many here tonight have an expense account? And up went the hands, and he went quickly around. Looks like half to me. I suggest we each take somebody to dinner tonight. Brilliant. And I've been trying to get that part of NTL ever since. But when I've run my own labs that I've set up and funded or whatever, then I ask people to contribute if they're corporate. Yeah, and I charge them a higher fee to begin with. And I know some other people do, but I still think we should be doing that because we'd get more of the normal people back in and not just the corporate folks. Because it's really, I mean, that guy learned something. You know, he didn't know that people did things without expense accounts. I mean,
Right.
weird.
So was that now? Were you an NTL member at that time, or
No,
you were just interested in NTL?
yeah, and they let me
Yeah.
do a lab, and I've been doing groups with Gestalt Institute, and my first actual group wasn't an NTL group or a Gestalt group, really. I was uh, working with uh, so-called potential dropouts. I was teaching high school, um, and since the weird kids seemed to uh, be attracted to me and one other guy, um, they put us in charge of the potential dropouts. In fact, um, it wasn't until the following year that I changed my description of them to be potential graduates, which that was in
Right.
1971, and so I was a little bit ahead of the official words of appreciative inquiry, but it was that attitude. Um,
Right.
and since I had been a ranger back in 1962, yeah, at Philmont Scout Ranch, where you take
Right.
teenage kids on backpacking trips, um, I still like doing that. And so I thought I would do that with my potential dropouts, uh, get them away from uh, the normal world and see if they could function. And since it was a public high school, I had to get permission um, from the parents and from the school system. And I took 5 girls and 12 boys on a backpacking trip by myself. I can't imagine that being even conceived of now. It's just, that it wouldn't happen, right?
Right.
Um, but they all signed a permission slip saying they wouldn't do drugs, they wouldn't do sex, they wouldn't do alcohol, they wouldn't do cigarettes, all this stuff that they mostly did most of the time anyway. Um, and it was on the second night, third morning, um, that I discovered some of them up the road under a waterfall showering, and some of them doing so naked, but others not feeling comfortable with that, let alone me. I thought, oh, I'm in serious trouble here. So I gathered them around the campfire at late morning and said, look, seriously, if this goes on, I'll lose my job. I don't know what to do. Well, that hadn't ever occurred to them. Um, and so they started talking about it, and we started sharing stuff back and forth. And late afternoon, they said, uh, could we, they went away and came back as a group, and they said, well, we've got a proposal. And that is, could we do this tomorrow as well? And so we
Ah.
stayed,
Uh-huh.
it was a 6-day trip, and we stayed the last 3 days at that campfire and did a group. And I made a number of mistakes that I haven't made since, I hope, but I I got through it, you know. And when
Right.
one of the girls walked away because she was upset with what one of the boys had said, uh, we set out after her going up the hill. And Russ, who was one of the more mature kids, was walking beside me, and he said, well, do you know what you're doing? And I said, nope. And he said, he was relieved,
Right.
which was weird. Um, and that reminds me, you may remember this, Barbara, at the 50th uh, Jubilee, whatever thing, 50th birthday in 97. There were various speakers sharing their wisdom with the rest of us. And um, there was a woman who ran a bed and breakfast back in 40s when the thing was just starting. And she said, I used to listen to all those famous people you keep talking about today. They would sit around the breakfast table. And let me tell you, they didn't have a clue what they were doing. Wonderful. I thought, yeah, just like me. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. Um,
Right.
so that's one of the things I've tried to do, in fact, when I do a lab, is not to act as if I know what I'm doing. Um, and I have colleagues, and I remember one time one of my colleagues walked into my tea group room, which I was setting up, and put a flip chart on the wall of rules for tea group, like speak for myself and use I language and listen. This. And I thought that was the whole point of a tea group, is to find out for yourself what doesn't work. So once she'd left, I took it off the wall. Um, it was one of the rooms in the Bethel Inn, um, where they had a special space where they could put walls up and divide it into floors.
Right.
And um, and I had taken the piece of paper down, and I turned around, and in came this woman from the Bethel staff with, I was about to call it a vase of flowers. Back there, it would have been a vase of flowers, but anyway, it was flowers. And she said, "Shall I just put these on the table?" And she was setting it down on the table beside the box of tissues. And I just looked at it for a moment. I said, "No, would you just put it in the middle of the circle on the floor there?" I have no idea where that came from. Um, but that was the first of the AIHIs. You were there for the second or third one, I think.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and Sushma was supposed to be working with me. She'd been caught by the monsoon in India. So I was doing this on my own. And I just put the flowers in the middle. And then I left the tissues on the table. And when some people asked about it, because that one participant in that lab said, "This is a T group on speed." Because by framing it with the AI model, the appreciative inquiry model, we had said, let's focus on the good stuff. And we went through all the bad stuff the first day. So we got rid of the various crises that people had been through and were worrying about. And by Tuesday, we were on to, what can we do better? What can we do more? What's working well? Um, and it helped that some of them had been in T group before, but just proved to me that one T group is not really enough. Um,
Oh, right. Yeah.
and
So, Walt, was
they,
that
so
some of your, excuse me.
I was just going to say that what happened was the participants said, "What are the flowers for?" Because when the group would go quiet, people would find they were looking at the flowers. And so I sort of made up the answer, and I said, "Well, there's tissues over on that table, and I've been in T groups where the trainer would put the tissues in the middle of the circle, so it would be easy to access. And I carry a spare handkerchief in my back pocket. Um, I have one for myself, but I have one for somebody else if they need it. I learned that from my mother. She said, you must always have a spare handkerchief for the young lady." And so I've given away a number of handkerchiefs over the years. Not right away, but if it's necessary. And in fact, at my mother's funeral, I was standing there, I was going to sing for her. And I was in tears off and on. So I'd been using my right pocket handkerchief. And I must have put it in a different pocket because I started crying again. And I reached for my regular handkerchief and it wasn't there. And I dug around and I thought, ah, I've got mom's handkerchief. So I used the spare handkerchief for myself. That was a lot of stuff comes from back there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well,
anyway, what I came up with for the tissues was the tissues are for issues and the flowers are for powers.
I love that, Walt. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So I know AI was a little later. Can you remember some of your very, very first experiences in NTL that you feel really good and powerful and
yeah, the first one I felt when I was still an intern back in '78, I thought um, I can do this. I remember a journal entry. I can do this. I can't do it perfectly yet, if anybody ever gets there, but I can do this. And that was important to know because I'm not always, um, I don't know if Glenn can hear me, but I'm looking at my face and my lips are out of sync with my voice. I don't know if that's a problem or not.
It is not a problem here on the recording. They are perfectly synced.
Okay, it's probably the distance from Scotland to where you are. So
Mhm.
um, the the early stuff was actually um, I was a trainer for the Positive Power and Influence program that Roger Harrison and Dave Berlew put together. when they were at NTL. It was kind of their response to what do you do after an HI lab. So their company sent me into NTL a couple times to do the power and influence program and the negotiating program. So I had experience of NTL as an organization, but not as a T group. And in fact, I didn't do an NTL T group until the first PWC, Professional Work Conference, back in 1988. And this was because people were thinking, hey, we better be sure that our trainers are up to date on diversity issues, on T group issues, whatever. And the two people I worked with were Edie Seashore and John Carter. The other two trainers were Joe Luft and can't remember the fourth one. But John, I think it was, who said sometime during the week, we were really worried about this, having experienced T group trainers in a group. What's the T group going to be like? And they said, we've been relieved to discover that you're just as crazy as any normal participants, so we can relax. He may not have said crazy, but something like that.
Yeah.
And
Sounds like John. Yeah.
yeah, and I'd known John at the Control Institute. He was a year ahead of me in those programs. And at one of the first breaks that week, he came up and said, "Hey, Walt, good to see you. How things going?" And we just had a chat over the coffee. Later, he explained that that was something he did regularly, was to make out of group personal contact with each participant. And I've remembered that. I haven't always managed to do everyone, but I've remembered that as a learning. And I remember that Edie was concerned with one of the stale pale males, old white guys like me, not getting the diversity stuff. And she wrote him a letter. And then she spoke to him a bit in the group. And what I got from that was it's okay to go one on one when that feels right.
Right.
So, yeah, and I think the first T group that I did as a NTL trainer in NTL was, I think, the next year, 1989. And Norma Jean was the dean of that. And it got all mixed up because we had more people than we expected, and somebody didn't show up. And so it was going to end up with me leading a T group. And I said, but Norma Jean, my understanding was that particularly when you're new at this, you should be working with a colleague, two trainers. She said, have you done a group before? I said, yeah. She said, you can do one again. And it was that kind of thing. I mean, that's the kind of support I got from you in that North Carolina lab where when you were the dean. You can do this. So that's really important. And I've been dean of more labs now that I can count. I started the international HIs in early 2000 and the first two AIHIs, and then I came over here and was the dean of the OD program that ran through the people, the OD people in Oxford, Mian and Phil, and I think it's really important to give that kind of support to the younger trainers. I mean, I've mentored in the last 10, 15 years people who are now successful trainers from Kazakhstan, from Palestine, from India, from France, Italy, even the US. And that's my payback for people like you and Norma Jean who said that you thought I could do it. So, yeah.
And you always did. You always did.
Yeah.
Yeah. You always did. Yeah.
And there were people who weren't pleased with me. There was a guy in one of the labs who said, "Well, you seem to have a thing about democracy." And I said, well, aside from the fact that that's kind of how NTL started, was we've had a Second World War. Let's see what we can do differently instead of doing another one. And that's about democracy. Um, and at that point, I'd been actively campaigning for Scottish independence. And so I'd been out campaigning, trying to get people to vote. I also campaigned for McGovern, which didn't prove too successful. And
we're staying positive with the AI concept, Walt.
exactly. Well, there was a response to that. People put out a bumper sticker saying, "I'm from Massachusetts. Don't blame me." That was the only state that voted McGovern. And
Yeah.
we're gonna go for independence again next year, and we're gonna get it. So it is. But what this guy was saying was democracy takes time. I was doing one of my usual bits when people. I remember it happened to Bethel once. Um, the the sun was shining. It was a very tempting time to go sit out on the lawn at Bethel instead of in one of those old rooms back in the hub. And sorry, my computer's slipping. So the usual thing came up. Why don't we go outside? One guy stands up. Another guy stands up and says, "Yeah, let's go." And then the irritating person in the presence of their trainer says, "So how did that decision get made?" And when they figure out a way to make decisions, because when somebody says, "Oh, it's simple, just take a vote," I said, "Okay, how many votes? Majority? 2/3? What happens to the minority?" I just kept asking those irritating questions. And so by the time they figured out how to do it, next day it was raining. So, they were ticked off. But but when that came up in that particular group, and that guy was saying that, I said, I have been out for the last 2 years, going door to door, knocking on the door, listening to people, talking to people, trying to get them to take responsibility for their own country. That's why democracy is important to me. And yeah, I still haven't figured out how to keep talking while I'm starting to cry, but I do it anyway. There was a woman in my Gestalt training program, very first weekend of 3 years. She started crying about something while she was talking with me. And I sat back and shut up. And she looked at me and said, "Why did you stop?" I said, "Well, you were crying." And she looked across the room at me and said, "I can work and cry at the same time. Can you?" And yeah,
And that's where your famous saying is, talk through your tears. I remember
yeah,
you teaching me that. You can talk through your tears.
yeah,
You taught me
yeah.
that a long time ago, Walt.
See, and I don't know that. I don't know when I say these things. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I, I,
yeah.
I told the story about the handkerchief to a group where I was co-training with one of this woman from Kazakhstan. Um, she was the co-trainer. I was training. I explained the handkerchief in some situation, and um, she said, "Yes, it works. I still have one of Walt's handkerchiefs." So, I mean, yeah, you never know. That's what Ed Nevis said to us once at the Gestalt Institute. When you are working with a group, at least one member of the group, but combined all the members of the group, someone will remember every single thing you say, which is kind of the appreciative inquiry version of Herb's story. Yeah.
Right, right.
Oh, we didn't
Do
tell
you
that on the tape.
do what?
They can. I didn't tell that story when it was running, so I better put it in really quick. That
Okay, let's hear that. Let's hear
Herb
the Herb
Shepherd was
Shepherd.
doing a uh, uh, a lab, a workshop at the Gestalt Institute on life and career designing, and Herb wrote an article about that called uh, "Life Designing is Designing Life Worth Living." That was his summary. But I convinced him to do a couple workshops at the Institute so I could watch him work. And I watched him work, and he was setting up exercises and sitting back and letting them go. So started Friday night. By Saturday night, I hadn't seen him do much of anything. So I said to him over dinner in Little Italy, he was having his white wine, I was having my glass of water, and I said, Herb, you're not doing anything. I want to watch your interventions, and you're not doing anything. So he takes a sip of his wine, leans back in his chair, and says, Walt, if you had fucked up as many interventions as I have, you'd be quiet too. And yeah, that's a real reassurance that um, the best way to find out what's going on in a group is to shut up and watch.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
although Ed Mayhew was telling me a story about that when we were working in a workshop over here in Germany, and he said his group was complaining. He said, "You're not doing anything. You're just sitting there doing nothing." And Ed's response to them was, "You have to show up in order to do nothing." And so that's it. And once you show up, and if you're just observing, then you got Yogi Berra on your side. You can observe a lot just by watching. No kidding, Yogi. Anyway, you keep trying to
Do
ask a
you have
question.
a story more to the middle of your time with NTL, and then also I want one more recently. Have you got anything in the middle?
Let's see.
And if you don't, that's okay. You can tell a
It's
story
well,
about.
I, this is kind of the middle because I'm sure it was in the 90s. You may remember. It was the lab in North Carolina, or wherever it was, Virginia. I don't know.
I don't know.
It was autumn because we had somebody making fun of a pumpkin or something like that. You had a different tea group. In my tea group, there was a woman named Dee, and on the Tuesday, it was Columbus Day, and Dee showed up in a T-shirt that said, "This is Columbus Day. My people welcome your people to our country." And so
I remember that.
being really clever, I said, "Ah, so you're a Native American?" And she said, "No, I'm an
I'm
American
an
Indian."
Indian. I
And I
remember.
said, and this I will never live down, but I said, "No, you're a Native American."
I
So
remember
I was
that.
trying to tell her who she was,
I
and
remember that
she made it
exactly.
really clear to me that she was an
Right.
American Indian. She was actually part of AIM, American Indian Movement, and
Right.
she was serious about. She still is. I get her uh, notices sometimes, her messages. Um, but what was really crucial about that was the Tuesday. I'm sure it was the Tuesday. On Thursday, I was doing what I still tend to do if I'm in a lab with more than me. Um, there used to be diversity on Thursday, and
Right.
I would say to people, "Look, I'm the white guy. I need to do diversity. It's not right for the woman or the black person or the American Indian or whoever to do diversity. The white guys have to stand up for it." Although now we're working on it. Sue Lamb and a bunch of us are doing the third revision of our manual for HI Lab, and
Oh, are
we're
you?
put,
Uh-huh.
we're putting in now that diversity should be every day, to do a piece of diversity every day, so it's
Oh,
not just one
good.
day.
Good.
Um, but anyway, it was mine on Thursday, and I remembered what Dee had said, and I had remembered myself being uh, politically correct, and that wasn't personally correct. So I broke the rules. I remember breaking the rules another time, but I broke the rules and said, um, would you form small groups? And instead of telling them to be uh, white folks or women or black men or whatever, just choose your own group of people you think are like you. And this will be not your politically correct group, but you're a personally correct group. And so people went around making groups. And then I said, before you report out, I want you to decide on what your name is as your group. You know, who are you? And it began circling around, and this one group was sort of, but um, people said, okay, what's your name for yourselves? And one of the guys said, this was a group of white men. One of the guys said, we're the normal ones. And when I've told that story to some people, they said, you let them get away with it? I said, I let them get away with it, but I didn't have to do anything. They got more feedback than they had ever imagined.
Exactly. Exactly.
And the
Because
best,
Walt, you had set the foundation, like you always do, of it's safe in here to be authentic. You do that
yeah,
better than anybody that I know of.
well, I better keep doing it then. Because what happened afterwards, maybe a month, I got no, it was 6 months. So I remember that was his statement. You may not remember me. Um, oh, yeah, I remember you. Um, but I was in that group where we declared ourselves the normal people. And when I got back to work, I fished around in the wastebasket and found a note from HR asking for volunteers to be involved in a diversity program here in the company. And I pulled out that piece of paper and I signed up. And I've been doing it for the last 6 months. Yes. You know, that's one straight white guy at a time. You know?
Right. Right.
Yeah. And the other time I broke the rules was
Oh, Walt, there's no limit to the times you don't try to kid me. Don't try
another
to kid
time
me.
another time I broke the rules, and this time I didn't know there was a rule. Um, and I was we'd been in tea groups for a couple days, and one of the women in my tea group had come out right away. I'm gay, and she wasn't backing off from anything, and she'd already taken on some people in the tea group. And then she discovered that diversity was going to be on Thursday, and she said, "Now, Walt, I don't know what you're planning, but I'm out. I don't want to be ignored." I said, okay. And then I started thinking, well, and I introduced the thing which the staff had agreed to. I wasn't the dean, um, which was to ask people to form groups according to um, gender. I think we started with age to be a little bit safer, but we got to gender. And I said, I know that some people in this group are straight, some are gay, and some are okay with that, and some are not okay with that. Um, so I want to be clear that this is usually not the kind of environment for you to come out for the first time. You may want it to be a whole lot safer before you do that. But there are people here who have come out. So I want there to be two groups, but there will be one group um, which is okay with their gender or their status. Their back then, I think we even used preference. Uh, it
Yes,
seems so outrageous now. You prefer, you know?
I know.
I remember a gay guy said to me, "Do you think I would go through all this shit if I preferred it?" Um, and so I said, "So if you're safely for yourself out, you can go whichever direction you want. If you're not safe, don't say that. Just stand with the gender you uh, look like." We didn't have cisgender then, or I didn't. Um, and so men at this side, women at this side, and um, And if you're okay with who you are, I guess I would have said a third, must have been a third place. I can't remember because it didn't happen. The
Really?
dean stepped right out. We were in the big room in Bethel at the in the, what do you call it? The clusters, that big
The
T group
clusters. Oh
space.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a big space. Yeah.
Right.
And the dean came out and said, "Stop! You can't do this. You can't do this." In NTL, we have a rule that we don't uh, ask people to talk about uh, their sexual identity. What are we? I'm losing.
Well, we said
See that
sexual preference. We said that's what we used to
we
say.
said preference, yeah. Um, but see, this is what drives me crazy. I can't remember things all the time, so
Right.
that's
Well,
why I
you're
haven't
doing
done
a
labs recently.
well. If you can't remember anything, you're sure fooling me, Walt.
Well, I should know that. I should know the dates. I should know the names.
Oh,
Um,
I
and,
see. I see.
and anyway,
Okay.
I wrote stuff down. I wrote my usual
Oh,
seven
yeah,
things
you've got
down.
7
So
things. I
yeah,
want to get to
but
those 7 things you wanted to say
okay,
when
but
you're
what?
ready.
Yeah,
Finish that.
the
Finish that story.
the um, the dean came out, so we don't do that. Now, from my memory, I never heard that, but there were a lot of things in NTL like that that people said, "Well, that's the way we always do it." Yeah, and the dean said, "We can't do this," and I said, "This one of the people in my group has specifically asked for us to make this possible, and I think she's got more say in this than either of us do." And she may have already been on her way at that point. She came out in the middle of the room with the dean and me, saying, "I'm gay. I want to be out. I'm out in this space. In my T group, I'm out here. So don't leave me out of this conversation." And this was going on, and the dean was getting more upset because this is not how we do things.
Well, do
And
you
I,
remember? Can you remember about the year that was? Was that in? Was it in the 90s? Do you
I would
think?
say it was the 90s.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so too.
yeah. Because
Yeah.
after that, I was doing a lot of groups where I was the dean.
Oh, yeah.
So 90s, I would have been doing as a as a staff
As a
only.
trainer. Yeah.
And what happened was that the woman who was out and the dean were um, going at it, and I was standing there, and I had this brilliant inspiration, which was I said to the two of them, "The three of us are having a conversation, and it seems to me that we have become, without setting it up, a fishbowl. So could I borrow a chair from somebody?" Somebody brought out a chair, and then I think I added another chair, and I said, "So the dean and me and whatever her name was are going to sit here in a fishbowl, and whenever anybody else wants to come in or out, do that. And if somebody's staying too long, tap them on the shoulder and take over." And we had one hell of a discussion. I mean, it was not
I'm
the
sure
T
you
group
did. I'm sure you
or
did.
the HI lab of how we were supposed to do diversity, but we were doing diversity right in the room. This was happening here and now. It was
Right.
stunning. And
Right.
if I could remember clearly, I think this is the woman. I was going to look it up, but I think this is the woman who came back to me because of she trusted me. That was what she said. I think that was the clue. So what was that one? She
Right.
trusted me, and there was this woman in NTL that she thought had to go, and that's what you did. You made that happen. You know who I'm talking about, and
I
and
sure
I
so.
I know that we're supposed to be talking about positive, but I see that as a positive. NTL was willing to go through a lot of complication and hard work by you um, to say,
By
hey,
us.
we have standards. We NTL is
By
not
us.
just for
Well, by
anybody or everybody.
us. By us. I didn't do that by myself. By us. I
Yeah,
mean, you walked every step with me on that. So, and I applaud you. And that really shows for me the trust that people get with you because they know that you walk with them every step of the way and that
yeah,
you do not abandon them. And you have done that low these 20, 30, whatever it is years, my friend.
39.
But,
It'll be 40 years in November or whatever that
well,
I
well,
officially became NTL member. But I had an effect back in '78. I have to admit. So
well,
yeah,
this violates the rule of AI. I shouldn't talk about myself, but this is my 50th year. My
I
50th year.
figured you were ahead of me. I figured you were ahead of me.
Oh, well, in years, but not in other ways.
Well,
Okay, I want to get to that list of 7 things you wanted to say. Have we?
yeah.
Because the time is just going too fast.
Um, I want to. You've been complimenting me. You came over to do the influencing workshop in at Harburn House in Scotland. Ooh, 10, 20 years ago, maybe. And what you
Oh,
said
yeah.
was, Walt always comes over to us in the US. It's time we came over to him. That's what I remember from that. So,
But I remember, Walt, us sitting around in that basement. Do you remember this? It was in the wintertime, and we all sang Christmas carols in our native language, and
oh,
there was
wow.
somebody. Do you remember that? There was somebody from Germany, and there's somebody from, oh, I don't remember all the
Croatia.
countries.
There was a woman from
But
Croatia. Yeah.
we, but they were from all different countries,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
in the end, we sang. Everybody sang "Silent Night" in their own language, but it had the
Oh,
same
wow.
tune,
Oh,
and
yep.
that was
Yeah.
you. That was you. That for me, uh, that is the picture I'll always have of you. That you brought together all of these different countries, and we sang "Silent Night." Everybody in their own country, of
Wow.
language of their own country, but it all had the same tune.
Yeah. Wow.
You did that, Walt. You did that, Walt. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow. Hmm.
you did
We
that.
did when we did the International HI Lab, which I deaned a couple of years. That was just over the 2000 mark, I think. Um, we we took over the kitchen from, can't remember his name now, the guy who ran the kitchen at Bethel. Um, he
Kevin.
he Kevin, exactly.
Kevin.
And Kevin, there are enough stories there. Um,
Oh,
and
God, yes.
we had people from various parts of the world there, and we set it up that they took over the kitchen and made a dinner. They worked out the courses among them, and they made so everybody had a dish from her or his own country. That was fantastic. Yeah. Right. Okay. The list of 7.
A list of 7. I want us to get to it because we have one final question on this question
Okay.
list that we must get to.
Okay. The first one was the uh, personally correct, and that we've already done. And then tissues or issues or flowers for powers. That was done. The mentoring people from Palestine, Kazakhstan, England, Italy, US. Yeah. The Green Book, writing those. I wrote 3 chapters in the Green Book. The third one was essentially editing what Kathy and Jane wrote about appreciative inquiry. Uh, they just said, well, it's all there. So I kind of put it together. Um, and then there's the one on journaling. And I've
Oh,
got
yeah.
a booklet on that now that I wrote as part of NTL. What did I do with that? I thought I'd have at least one thing. Yeah. Ooh, I'm going
I can't
reversed.
see it. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it says, yeah, in collaboration with NTL.
I think, Walt, didn't we, at least when we were having face to face, didn't we give that to each one of the participants?
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
We had there was an earlier version of 4 or 5 where
Uh,
I did the journaling one, and when that went out of print, one of the NTL participants over here in the OD course she said, "Could I have that booklet you gave out?" I said, "Well, they're done. They're out of print." She said, "Well, could you do one?" And so I had 4 weeks. I did it in 2 weeks. They printed it in 2 weeks, and I got them to her the day before she needed them for her workshop. So, given that I'm working my current project for the 5th year in a row now, my publisher does believe I can do things quickly, but not this one. Okay, so on the Green Book, the chapter that
Well,
I'm most
could
proud of.
you move over
Whoops,
just a little because, yeah, that's better. I was
yeah,
only seeing half. Yeah, that's
I
perfect.
sorry, I keep getting officially schizophrenic. Yeah, right. Um, the article that or the chapter I'm most proud of in the Green Book is I'm a straight white guy, so what's diversity got to do with me?
Right,
And that is one of the white guys in one of my labs asked that question,
right,
and I
right,
came up with my 7 answers. And I wrote that in the late 90s
right,
because the Green Book was published, that edition was published in 99, I think, 98 or 99. So I had to have written it before that.
right.
Um, and two of I was going to say young women, I think they're both in their 50s, who are uh, people I mentored, wanted to do some work on uh, diversity with a group, and they said, could they use my chapter? And I said, well, that's mid to late 90s.
Right.
And one of them wrote back and said, I just read it again last night. If you were going to do a new edition, I think you would need some stuff about identity. And I'm fully aware of that because of people I know. Um, but they said, otherwise, the theory's good. It works well. Well, that's the kind of, and the woman who wrote this has been in 2 T groups with me and has co-trained with me. And
Oh,
she takes on diversity more powerfully than anybody I've met so far. And that is saying something. So to have her say, this is good stuff. Yeah,
right.
that, that was Julian. Yeah.
Oh,
And, and, so that was a high point, being accepted as an author. I was used to the Orange Book before the Green Book, and all the people in there were granddaddies and grandmothers of us.
right,
You know,
right.
um,
And we're the
the
grandmothers and granddads now, don't you think? Sorry, sorry.
yeah, I mean, at least I've got practice with that because Rosie's daughter has 3 children. I am a step grandfather, and the other
Oh,
grandfathers weren't around. I'm the one, so they know
you're
I'm
the
not
one.
the real one, but they know I'm the one. Yeah.
Oh,
So
I bet you're good at that. I bet
and
you're
it's
good at that.
it's
Yeah,
something grandparent energy. Now,
right.
number 5,
Uh-huh.
I was doing some work in for a German company, but with their Asian division, and I brought Sushma in. Sushma Sushma Sharma and I have worked together. In 1 year, we worked together 5 times on 4 continents. So we've
Oh,
done a lot of work together, and
yeah,
it works really well because we are totally opposite.
right.
Um,
Oh, uh-huh.
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
just great. So I invited her to work with me in this client group, um, and we did some really good work. But we needed a third person, so she asked some people, and I asked some people. Um, the woman I know in China, Yanjun Feng, known to most people here as Jane Feng, but I
Oh,
I learned
uh-huh.
her Chinese name when I was working with her
Uh-huh.
back in the 80s, probably 80s or
Uh-huh.
90s. And she was on the 24-hour global thing that John Hovel put together recently. And
Uh-huh.
um, she, I asked her if she knew anybody in Asia that we could work with, and she recommended a friend of hers. So we had 3 people, uh, Yo King Cho, Sushma Sharma, and Walt Hopkins. And we decided, while we were running this workshop for our client, that we ought to have what Sushma calls a festival of learning. And we set it up in
I remember that.
Singapore, which is where Guangzhou
Uh,
is.
yeah,
And we invited a lot of our colleagues to come, and we put up the money, and we put up the deposit for the hotel and everything. We
you
made it happen,
financed it. Yeah,
and we made it happen again the second year. Sushma's done it again since then. And when I got to the point of wanting to run T groups and HI labs for people in Europe who weren't interested in OD, because I was doing that program every year for, I think I was in it for 10 or 11 years straight. I followed the same thing, and it followed from that Cincinnati story where the guy said, "How many people have expense accounts?" You know, I said, "I have money. I'm giving it to various good causes. This is a good cause." Um, so I paid out the £1,000 or whatever it was to reserve the hotel. I put the money into uh, going after the people, recruiting the people, and all that, and figured out a way to pay the staff. And I did that 4 years, I think. First year it didn't work. Second year it did. Third year it did. Fourth year was 2020, and COVID killed it off.
COVID. Yeah,
But that's that whole thing of Sushma's idea of a of a of a festival of learning that we could fund. We didn't have to wait for
right.
NTL, and I
Yeah,
worry about that now because people say, well, we can't afford to run T groups because NTL doesn't have the money to put the deposit on a hotel.
right, right,
And I said, well, I know people in NTL who have money. There are people who don't. There
right,
are people who have money who donate to NTL.
right,
We could put up the money and reserve the hotel.
right,
Um,
right.
so it all goes back to that first lab when I wasn't even an NTL member. And the guy said, who's got an expense account? And the expense account is the seventh one. So that leaves the sixth one, which is that professional work conference that I talked about earlier, 1988, I think. Yes,
You
it's right
know,
there.
I was
I'm
chair of
looking at my
MidCom.
bookshelf. Sorry?
I was chair of MidCom, member involvement and development, I think.
Ah,
And we put that thing together as a
right. Yeah.
requirement, and we got it past the board. And I remember standing up saying to the membership meeting, this is a requirement. And Walt, don't ever tell NTL members something is required if you want to live. But, but you helped put legs on that thing. And you helped put legs on it. And you helped um, legitimize that it needed to be done. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
And I understand.
we're just
I,
about out of time. So can you tell me what is your, of course, this is not AI. Can you tell me your high dream for NTL? What would be your
um,
high dream for NTL
no,
currently?
my high dream is how I start. Sushma likes to use high dream. I use serious dream. Um,
Okay,
that's the thing I'm working on because back in 1979, I came up with the idea that a goal is a dream taken seriously.
right.
Turns out nobody else said that, so I guess I must have.
Yeah,
And that's what I'm working on now, to revise that 40th anniversary version. And the goal for me is for us to keep noticing the people that aren't yet in. And that's
okay,
what NTL has been doing. So at
right,
first, it was only men, and then, and there was white men. And then
right,
women got noticed, and then black people got noticed. And then we stayed in that for decades. We are
right,
just now, according to the mail I got the other day, looking at the quadrant
right,
because there are more people than the quadrant.
right,
And so my high dream is that we will keep doing that. Not that we'll do it, but that we'll keep doing it.
right.
So one of my step grandchildren um, is now on the verge of a major step in her being trans. I mean, she's been trans in her head. She's now they are now doing a major step. And that's an issue in this country.
Oh, yeah.
And yet we finally have in NTL, we have people who are trans. And that's not just the final step. That's the current step. Each time we add people, and that is the thing I quote from Orson Scott Card in that article, in that chapter, and I've got it here. It's on the other page. Yeah. So in his science fiction novel, he's writing about aliens on another universe. But so I just inserted human and alien here. Orson Scott Card says in Speaker for the Dead, the difference between human and alien is not in the creature judged, but in the creature judging. When we declare an alien species to be human, it does not mean that they have passed a threshold of moral maturity. It means that we have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So each time NTL welcomes a new group of people that they have been unconsciously or consciously excluding, it's another step in our moral maturity. That's my high dream.